Oftentimes when you're changing a behavior, you're going to start with continuous reinforcement, reinforcing every single instance of the behavior. But in the real world, that is often not possible. So how do you maintain behavior while making reinforcement delivery more practical and sustainable in real world settings? Well, that's what we're going to be looking at today, because I am Dr. Igor Yurichevich, and this is behavior modification. Let's go. All right, so today we're going to be looking at intermittent reinforcement. And we mentioned this a few times in previous videos, but today we're going to do our deep dive into a couple of aspects of intermittent reinforcement. So intermittent reinforcement, we're going to start with a basic working definition of it. And for this, we're going to go back to the Applied Behavior Analysis, third edition book by Cooper, Heron, and Heward. And in this, they define intermittent reinforcement as reinforcement that occurs between continuous reinforcement and extinction. Many intermittent schedules of reinforcement are possible in which some, but not all occurrences of the behavior are reinforced. So this is the key idea of intermittent reinforcement. The idea that some, but not all occurrences of the behavior are reinforced. And this can be thought of as falling on a continuum between continuous reinforcement, where every single instance of the behavior is reinforced, all the way to extinction, where no instance of the behavior is reinforced. Somewhere in between there, you have intermittent reinforcement, and there are a wide variety of different types of intermittent reinforcement. So for an overview of the basics, you can check out this video here, intermittent schedules of reinforcement. And for an overview of the effects of intermittent reinforcement, check out this video right here. What are the effects of intermittent schedules of reinforcement? Both links available in the description, because those are the basics. And what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at one of the implications and applications of intermittent reinforcement, which is how do you move from continuous reinforcement to intermittent reinforcement? So how do you go from reinforcing every single instance of a behavior to reinforcing only some of the instances of that behavior? And how do you do that without hitting extinction, without going through a procedure where the learner gets their behavior extinguished because you moved too quickly to a very extreme intermittent schedule of reinforcement? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. It's called thinning the intermittent reinforcement. And we're going to take a look at what schedule thinning is and what we need to do it correctly. All right, so what is schedule thinning? Schedule thinning is where you gradually reduce the frequency of reinforcement after a behavior has been acquired under a more dense schedule, typically under a continuous reinforcement schedule. So this is very useful in the real world, where continuous reinforcement is extremely rare. Usually you are not reinforced every single time that you do a behavior that would earn you reinforcement. So for example, in a classroom setting, a student might move from continuous reinforcement to a variable schedule of reinforcement, maybe a variable schedule of reinforcement 6, when they put up their hand. So initially, when you're trying to teach this child the behavior of putting up their hand and maybe not shouting out answers in the classroom, every single time they put up their hand, you will be calling on that child. That is a continuous schedule of reinforcement. Hand goes up, child gets called on. Hand goes up, that child gets called on. However, you can't ignore the other students in your class indefinitely. So eventually, when that child hand goes up, you're going to have to not reinforce certain instances of that behavior. And in this case, if there's 6 children in the classroom, eventually that child is going to be on a variable ratio schedule of 6, where maybe every 6th time they put up their hand, they will get called on. Another example, in a work setting, as you get promoted, it's quite possible that your praise from the boss might move from a variable ratio schedule of 10. You get on average praised every 10 positive behaviors that you do, every 10 target behaviors that you do for this company. It might move for a variable ratio schedule of 10 to a variable ratio schedule of 20. Now that you have more responsibility and more autonomy, your boss isn't checking in on you as much as they used to. So you do more work in order to receive any sort of reinforcement, any sort of attention or praise from your boss that's one level above you. So the goal of schedule thinning, first off, is to maintain the target behavior. So we don't want to lose the target behavior, but we want to maintain it while at the same time making that reinforcement delivery more practical and sustainable in those real world settings. So again, it's just impossible in the real world to get reinforced every single time you do a behavior. So how can we maintain a behavior while making that reinforcement delivery more practical and more sustainable? So we're going to take a look at two common methods that we can use to thin the schedule, move it from a continuous reinforcement schedule to an intermittent schedule of reinforcement, and then making that intermittent schedule of reinforcement more and more sparse, more and more thin as we go on. So two common methods of schedule thinning. One is to gradually increase in the ratio or the interval of your intermittent schedule of reinforcement. So this is where you gradually increase the number of responses required or increase the time that is required to elapse before a reinforcement is delivered. And you always, always, always want to base the pace of the thinning on the learner's performance. So let's take a look at an example. Let's say that you were trying to reinforce positive study behavior. So we're going to revisit a student that we looked at before, Jordan. So Jordan is a college student and she's trying to build these better study habits. So she's rewarding herself for studying without checking her phone. And at first she rewards herself with a 5-minute break for every 15 minutes of studying without checking her phone. And then as the studying becomes more routine, as she is able to hit that mark of 15 minutes and earn that 5-minute reinforcement, then we increase the interval. So now she's going to get a break after every 20 minutes. And once that is successful, she's going to get a break after every 30 minutes. And eventually she's going to get a break only after completing the entire study goal. For example, maybe finishing a chapter. So we're going to gradually increase, in this case, the interval that she needs to complete before she receives her reinforcement. But again, we don't jump from 15 minutes to an hour immediately. We base it on the performance. And once she's able to sustain her studying for 15 minutes, then we take it up a notch to 20. Once she can do 20, then we take it up a notch to 30. And if we find that taking it up a notch all of a sudden decreases the study behavior and she starts to fail and not be able to earn reinforcements, then we would decrease it back to a sustainable level that she can achieve and then move it back up again once she has mastered that particular level. So that's one procedure, gradual increase in either the ratio or the interval. Another procedure or the other procedure for schedule thinning is to use clear instructions or cues. So in this case, you want to communicate your reinforcement expectations through either rules or signs or some sort of verbal cues. And this can help reduce confusion. It can help reduce any sort of aggressive or frustration behaviors and improve the compliance during the thinning. So for example, if you're a parent and you have a child that is doing chores and you want to increase the number of chores that they need to do in order to maybe earn their allowance, you want them to take on more responsibility in order to earn the allowance, you don't want to just surprise them with that 1 week and not reinforce them for doing one chore and wait until they do 3 chores to get reinforced. They're going to be very confused. They're going to be very frustrated. They're going to maybe have some aggressive behaviors. What you want to do is you just want to communicate with clear instructions. So in this case, the parent would tell the child, hey, you know what? From now on, you're going to earn your allowance after finishing 3 chores, not just one. So previously you were on a continuous reinforcement schedule. You finished 1 chore and you received your reinforcement of your allowance. Now you're on a fixed ratio 3 schedule where you have to finish 3 chores and then you're going to earn your allowance. And all the time while we are thinning these reinforcement schedules, while we're thinning the intermittent schedules of reinforcement and requiring more behaviors or longer intervals in order to earn that reinforcement, you always, always, always want to watch out for ratio strain. So ratio strain is when the behavior breaks down because you have thinned the intermittent schedule of reinforcement too rapidly, and you get to overly demanding schedules. So signs of ratio strain are things like avoidance. The learner will now avoid the situation and will just kind of check out and no longer even try to perform the behavior. Other signs of ratio strain are things like aggression. The learner gets angry and aggressive and frustrated, whereas before they didn't. And then also things like long or unpredictable pauses in their behavior. This is all signs of ratio strain. So, for example, in a workplace setting, an employee might get praised for every single task when they begin their employment. So at the beginning of their employment, they get praised for every single task that they complete successfully. And then all of a sudden it switches for them getting praise for every 20 tasks that they completed successfully. So we've gone from a continuous reinforcement schedule where every task was reinforced, and then all of a sudden they go to a intermittent schedule of reinforcement where every 20th task is the one that gets reinforced. That employee could suddenly become unmotivated. They could suddenly become irritated. They could suddenly become frustrated with their job. And we don't want that. That's a sign of ratio strain. Another example, something that many of us might be familiar with, is the ratio strains that occur in some video games. So if you're playing a video game where you are leveling up, for example, your character or your weapons or some of your gear, earning the previous level up, let's say, might have only taken you 1 hour of gameplay. So in 1 hour of gameplay, you earned that level up, and that was your reinforcement. But what if the next level, to reach it, it's going to take you 15 hours? So the previous level took 1 hour, the next level is going to take 15 hours. Well, if that's the case, gamers might lose interest. Gamers might start avoiding the game. Gamers might be very frustrating and take out their aggression on the game or on their console maybe. So this is an example of, again, ratio strain. We've gone from 1 hour for the next previous level up to now 15 hours of gameplay for the next level up. So the gamer is very, very likely to lose interest. Now, notice that this is not rage quitting from a difficulty spike. So if the spike in difficulty for the next level all of a sudden just went way up and is way beyond the current skill level of the player, that's a shaping issue where successive shaping steps have been skipped. So don't get those two confused. The ratio strain is when either the amount of behavior or the interval between when you get reinforced has increased way too much for the behavior to be sustained. So we don't want to get ratio strain. So how do we prevent ratio strain? And then if it happens, how do we respond to ratio strain? Well, the things to do is to prevent it, you want to use small gradual increases in your reinforcement requirements. You want to use small gradual increases in the number of behaviors that need to occur before reinforcement is delivered, or in the interval that needs to pass before reinforcement is delivered. So use those small gradual increases. And then if you find, even with those small gradual increases, that ratio strain is occurring, so you see that aggression, you see that avoidance, you see those long and unpredictable pauses, in that case, you want to then reduce the ratio, go back to a denser schedule, and then once stability returns in that behavior, then you resume that gradual thinning. So for example, in that workplace setting, that employee that was praised for every single task now only gets feedback and praised after every 20th task. All of a sudden, you notice as their employer that they have become unmotivated and they have become irritated. If that's the case, then you want to reduce that intermittent schedule of reinforcement back from 20 tasks down to, say, maybe 2. So now instead of being praised for every 20th task, or as they were initially being praised for every single task, now we increase it just a little bit, and now they're praised for every 2 tasks that they perform. And then once behavior stabilizes at that level, then you go up to maybe every 3 tasks, and then every 4 tasks, and every 5 tasks, and you bring them along gradually, always looking out for those instances of ratio strain. And if you see them, then drop down that intermittent schedule of reinforcement, unthin the intermittent schedule of reinforcement, make it a more dense schedule of reinforcement, again, until behavior stabilizes, and then gradually thin the schedule once more. All right, so that's what we were going to take a look at today on intermittent reinforcement. So some key takeaways. First off, what is schedule thinning? Schedule thinning is when you increase the schedule, the requirements of a schedule in intermittent reinforcement, either by requiring more behaviors to occur for reinforcement to be earned, or a longer interval to expire before reinforcement is earned. Always remember that thinning for reinforcement has to be data driven, based on the performance of the individual, and thus individualized. One solution for thinning the intermittent reinforcement schedule does not apply to everybody. Two common methods of schedule thinning is to gradually increase the ratio or interval, and to use those clear instructions or cues. And those clear cues just help your learner to adapt to that less frequent reinforcement. And while you're doing this, always watch out for ratio strain. Always monitor their behavior for signs of strain. And if you see signs of strain, then you either prevent it or respond to it, and aim for that long-term maintenance of the target behavior in a realistic setting. So that is it for what I wanted to cover today. Next time, we're going to take a look at a very special case of intermittent reinforcement that is used to increase response variability using what are known as lag schedules of reinforcement. So if you're happy in doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, then maybe skip the next video. But if you're looking to inject a little bit of variability in your behavior, then come back next time. But until then, stay frosty, stay functional, and go modify some behavior.
Ladies, that was smooth. Barbie smooth.